someone had told me I'd end up paying rent to live in the same apartment as my ex-girlfriend, I would have laughed. Not a happy laugh, but the sharp, brittle kind that cracks from a place of disbelief and despair. Life, it turned out, had a sense of humor darker than my own. The breakup had been a demolition. Clara didn't just leave, she took the wrecking ball to the entire structure of my life, leveling emotional support beams and shattering the windows of every future I'd imagined. I was left standing in the rubble, covered in the dust of 6 years together, with nowhere to go. My name wasn't on the lease of our old place, a technicality that became a brutal eviction notice, so I'd scrolled through rental listings until my vision blurred, the desperation a physical ache in my chest. Every ad for a room for rent seemed to mock me. Must be clean. No drama. Young professionals only. I was a mess. I was the walking embodiment of drama, and the only thing I was professional at was replaying every mistake I'd ever made. Then I saw it. A clean, minimalist ad for a room in a 3-bedroom near the river. The pictures showed hardwood floors drenched in an afternoon light, a modern kitchen, and a bedroom with a window big enough to let the sky in. The price was miraculously within my budget. The ad was posted by a Brooke M. No last name, no details, just a few photos and a price. I emailed her a carefully crafted message designed to sound stable and sane. I was employed. I was quiet. I was the perfect, drama-free roommate. I was a liar, but a desperate one. Brooke replied within the hour. She was direct, her sentences short and to the point. She asked if I could come by that evening. I agreed immediately, a jolt of something like hope shooting through the static of my anxiety. The building was nice, newer than anything I could normally afford. When the door to apartment 4B opened, the woman standing there matched the tone of her emails. She was tall, with broad shoulders that filled the doorway, and dark hair pulled back in a messy but functional knot. Her eyes, a startlingly clear shade of green, assessed me with an unnerving stillness. She wore a plain gray t-shirt and paint-spattered jeans. She wasn't smiling. "You're Jade," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, hi, Brooke." She nodded once, stepping back to let me in. "Come on in." The apartment was even better in person. Clean, smelling faintly of lemon and sawdust. The living room was sparsely furnished with a large, comfortable-looking gray sofa, a coffee table made from a slab of reclaimed wood, and shelves filled with books and well-tended plants. It felt calm, stable, everything I wasn't. "The room's this way," she said, her voice a low, even hum. She led me down a short hall. "Bathroom's here. You'd share it with the other roommate. Kitchen's obviously back there. Help yourself to anything. Just replace it if you finish. It." She was all business. I appreciated it. It was easier than feigning friendliness. The room was perfect. It was empty, a blank canvas painted a soft, neutral gray. The large window looked out over a quiet side street lined with trees. I could already imagine my small desk under it. My easel in the corner. I could imagine breathing in here. "The other roommate," I started, turning back to her. "Are they home?" Brooke's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes flickered. "No, she's out of town for a few days, works as a consultant." I nodded, relieved. I didn't have the energy for another social test. "What's she like?" Brooke leaned against the doorframe, crossing her arms over her chest. The movement made the muscles in her forearms shift. "Quiet. Keeps to herself mostly. We get along fine." It was enough. It was more than enough. "I'll take it," I said, the words rushing out before I could second-guess myself. "I can pay the deposit right now. I can move in this weekend." For the first time, a corner of her mouth tilted up, a ghost of a smile. "Okay, good." We signed the lease on the kitchen island. Her handwriting was like her, clean, strong, no nonsense. I transferred the money and she handed me a key. It felt heavy in my palm, a solid piece of metal that represented a new start, a safe place. I spent the next 2 days packing up the wreckage of my old life into cardboard boxes. Each object was a memory I had to handle, a ghost I had to fold away. It was exhausting, miserable work. The only thing that kept me going was the image of that clean, quiet room, the promise of a place where Clara's ghost couldn't follow me. Moving day was a blur of sweat and aching muscles. My friend Mark helped me with the heavy furniture, his cheerful chatter a welcome distraction. Brooke was home, but she stayed mostly in her room, giving me space. When Mark had to leave, I was left with just a few boxes of books and art supplies. I was wrestling the last, heaviest box through the doorway when Brooke appeared in the hall. "Need a hand with that?" she asked. "I've got it," I grunted, my arms trembling. She didn't argue. She just walked over, bent down, and took one side of the box. Her grip was effortless. "Lift on 3, she said. 1, 2, 3. Together, we carried it easily into my new room. Her proximity was noticeable. She still smelled like sawdust and something else, something clean and sharp like citrus. I was acutely aware of the warmth radiating from her arm, just inches from mine. "Thanks," I said, wiping a sheen of sweat from my forehead. "No problem," she replied, her gaze sweeping over the cluttered room. "Looks like you're almost done." "Yeah, just unpacking now." I looked around at the mountain of boxes. It felt like an impossible task. "The fun part," she gave that same small, almost smile. "I'll be in the living room if you need anything. I'm putting a new shelf together." She left, and I was alone in my new sanctuary. I took a deep breath, the air tasting of hope and fresh paint. I could do this. I could build a life here. I started with the books, stacking them on the floor, trying to decide where to put the small bookshelf I'd brought. I worked for hours, losing myself in the mindless, physical task. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the floor. I heard the front door open, followed by the sound of keys clattering into a ceramic bowl on the entryway table. I recognized the sound. It was the same bowl Clara had kept by the door in our old apartment. A cold dread washed over me. It was a coincidence. It had to be. Then I heard her voice. "Brooke, you home?" My blood turned to ice. My heart stopped, then restarted with a painful, frantic beat. No, it couldn't be. It was impossible. A cosmic joke of the cruelest kind. I stood frozen in the middle of my room, surrounded by the debris of my past, listening to the sound of my personal ghost walking through the apartment. "Hey," Brooke's voice replied from the living room. It sounded exactly the same as it had all day, calm, steady, unbothered. "Trip go okay?" "Yeah, fine. Exhausting." "Did the new roommate move in?" I couldn't breathe. I pressed a hand to my mouth, trying to stifle the gasp that was clawing its way up my throat. "Yep," Brooke said. "She's in her room." There was a pause. I could hear footsteps coming down the hall. My hall. I backed away from my open door, pressing myself into the corner of the room as if I could melt into the wall. The footsteps stopped, and then Clara was standing in my doorway. Her eyes widened, her perfectly shaped mouth falling open. She was holding a leather briefcase, wearing the tailored navy suit she wore for work trips. She looked exactly the same. She looked like the woman who had ripped my world apart. "Jade?" she whispered, her voice laced with disbelief. I couldn't speak. I could only stare at her, my mind a blank, howling void. This wasn't a sanctuary. It was a trap, and I had just signed a 1-year lease. The first week was a masterclass in avoidance. I became a phantom in my own home. I learned the subtle sounds of the apartment, the specific creak of the floorboard outside Clara's room, the soft click of her door latching, the rumble of the shower that meant I had a 10-minute window to get to the kitchen for coffee without running into her. I survived on toast and caffeine, my stomach in a perpetual knot. My room, once a symbol of hope, became my fortress. I unpacked my things with the grim determination of a prisoner organizing their cell. The large window now felt like an exposure, a vulnerability to the world I was hiding from. Clara, for her part, seemed to be playing the same game. We were two ghosts haunting the same hallway, leaving traces of our presence, a damp towel in the bathroom, a half-empty mug in the sink, but never materializing at the same time. The silence between us was deafening, thick with 6 years of unspoken history and a breakup so raw it still felt like an open wound. The only thing that made it bearable was Brooke. She was the buffer zone, the neutral territory in our Cold War. She moved through the apartment with a placid grace that seemed entirely unaffected by the suffocating tension. She never mentioned the obvious, never acknowledged the bizarre, nightmarish coincidence that had brought us all under one roof. Her presence was a quiet anchor in the storm of my anxiety. She didn't offer sympathy or ask probing questions. Instead, she offered small, practical kindnesses. One morning, after a particularly rough night spent listening to Clara on a late-night work call, her laughter echoing faintly through the walls, I stumbled into the kitchen to find a fresh pot of coffee brewed and a single mug set out on the counter for me. Another evening, when I was trying to cook a sad meal of instant noodles without making a sound, she came in and started chopping vegetables beside me. She didn't speak for several minutes, the only sound the rhythmic, steady thump of her knife against the cutting board. "Making a stir-fry," she said finally, not looking at me. "Made too much. You want some?" I was so startled by the direct address that I could only nod. We ate on opposite ends of the kitchen island, the silence between us comfortable, not charged. The food was delicious, full of flavor and heat, a stark contrast to the blandness of my recent diet. It was the first real meal I'd had in days. I started observing her. It was what I did when I was anxious. I focused on the details of things, a habit from my years as an artist. I watched the way Brooke moved. She had an economy of motion, a confidence that was deeply calming to witness. When a cabinet door came loose, she didn't call a landlord. She got a screwdriver and fixed it in under 5 minutes, her brow furrowed in concentration. I noticed her hands. They were strong, with clean, short nails and a smattering of faint scars across the knuckles. They were hands that built things, fixed things. I watched them expertly assemble the bookshelf in the living room, handle a sharp kitchen knife, gently repot a drooping succulent. She was a creature of routine. Up at 6 every morning for a run, no matter the weather. Back by 7, a quiet shower, then coffee, and the news on her laptop at the kitchen island. She ran a custom furniture business out of a workshop across town, and she was usually gone by 8, not returning until well after the sun had set. Her days were solid, predictable. I envied her that structure. One Saturday, Clara was gone for the day, visiting her parents. The relief was so immense it made me dizzy. I finally ventured out of my room, deciding to spend the afternoon sketching in the living room. The light was good there. I was lost in the lines of my sketchbook when Brooke came home early. She was covered in a fine layer of sawdust, her hair escaping its knot in damp tendrils around her face. She stopped when she saw me on the couch, a flicker of surprise in her green eyes. "Hey," she said, her voice a little rough. "Hi," I replied, my pencil hovering over the page. I felt an absurd need to explain my presence in the common area. "Just drawing." She nodded, walking over to the new bookshelf she'd built. She ran a hand over the smooth, dark wood. "I was thinking of staining this. What do you think? A dark walnut." She was asking my opinion. It was such a small thing, but it felt monumental. "Yeah," I said, looking at the pale, unfinished pine. "Walnut would look good with the floors." She looked at me, really looked at me, and that tiny, almost smile appeared. "I've got some samples. Want to see?" I spent the next hour sitting on the floor with her, comparing small squares of stained wood, talking about undertones and finishes. I found myself speaking freely about color theory, about how different woods absorb stain, forgetting for a moment the knot of anxiety in my stomach. She listened intently, her gaze focused, making me feel like my opinion actually mattered. She was easy to be around. Her quiet wasn't an absence of words, it was a presence, a calm, steady space that I found myself wanting to be near. The more time I spent in her quiet company, the more I realized my initial perception of her was wrong. I had mistaken her stillness for aloofness, her directness for a lack of warmth. But she wasn't cold, she was just contained, a deep, still lake. The dynamic with Clara began to shift, too. My fear of running into her slowly curdled into a kind of weary frustration. Her presence was a constant, low-grade hum of pain, and I was tired of letting it dictate my life. One evening, the inevitable happened. We ended up in the kitchen at the same time. Brooke was at her workshop late. It was just us. Clara was making tea, her back to me. She moved with the same infuriating grace she always had. "We can't keep doing this, Jade," she said without turning around. Her voice was strained. Doing what? I asked, my own voice tight. I just wanted to get a glass of water and retreat. The silent treatment. It's ridiculous. We're adults. She finally turned, leaning against the counter. She looked tired. How did you even end up here? I answered an ad, I said, my hand gripping the edge of the counter. I didn't know. She let out a short, humorless laugh. Of course you didn't. My luck, she sighed, running a hand through her perfectly highlighted hair. Look, I know things were bad at the end, but we're roommates now. We have to be civil. Civil? She wanted to be civil, as if she hadn't shattered my heart into a million pieces and then criticized the way I swept them up. Fine, I said, my voice clipped. Civil it is. I got my water and left, my hands shaking. Later that night, there was a soft knock on my door. I opened it to find Brooke standing there, holding 2 bottles of beer. Tough night? She asked quietly. I just nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Come on, she said, jerking her head toward the living room. Movie night. We sat on the big gray sofa, a comfortable distance between us, and watched some mindless action movie. She didn't press me to talk. She just handed me a beer and hit play. Halfway through the movie, I felt my tense shoulders begin to relax for the first time all day. Her presence was a silent statement. I'm here. You're not alone in this. I found myself watching her in the flickering light from the television. The sharp line of her jaw, the way her throat moved when she took a drink of her beer, the intensity of her focus on the screen. A strange warmth spread through my chest, a feeling that had nothing to do with the alcohol. It was a dangerous feeling. It was a hopeful one. I was starting to realize that the ghost I was afraid of wasn't the only other person in the apartment. There was also Brooke, and she was very, very real. Life settled into a strange new rhythm, a fragile ecosystem with the 3 of us orbiting a tense, unspoken center. My interactions with Clara became a series of sterile pleasantries exchanged in the hallway. Morning. Did you get the mail? The trash needs to go out. We were polite strangers who knew each other's deepest secrets. It was a special kind of hell, but my orbit was slowly, irrevocably shifting its gravitational pull toward Brooke. The apartment began to feel less like a prison and more like a shared space. I found myself lingering in the kitchen, hoping she'd come home from her workshop. I'd make extra coffee in the morning, leaving the pot on for her. Small gestures, tentative bridges built across the chasm of my own anxiety. She, in turn, started leaving things for me. A newspaper on the kitchen island, folded open to the art section. A particularly interesting piece of driftwood she'd found on a run, left on my side of the bathroom counter. A pint of the expensive salted caramel ice cream I'd mentioned I liked once in passing. They were quiet offerings, demanding nothing in return. But they felt like everything. They were acknowledgments. They were acts of seeing. One rainy Tuesday, Clara had a new man over. His name was Derek, and he had a laugh that was too loud for our apartment. I could hear it through my closed door, a booming, obnoxious sound that scraped against my raw nerves. I tried to drown it out with music through my headphones, but it was no use. Each burst of his laughter felt like a personal insult. I was huddled on my bed, staring at a blank canvas, when a text message lit up my phone. It was from Brooke. Workshop. Now. Bring your sketchbook. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my coat and my art supplies and fled the apartment, my heart pounding with a strange mix of panic and relief. Her workshop was in a converted warehouse district by the old rail yards. The space was huge, with high ceilings and massive windows that let in the gray, rainy light. The air smelled richly of sawdust, turpentine, and coffee. It was filled with works in progress, towering skeletons of chairs, a half-finished dining table with a beautiful live edge, stacks of raw lumber waiting to be shaped. It was a creative sanctuary. It was her. She was standing at a massive workbench, sanding a piece of maple, her movements fluid and focused. She looked up when I came in, her face breaking into that rare, genuine smile that made my stomach do a slow, lazy flip. Hey, she said, wiping her hands on a rag tucked into her jeans. Glad you came. Thanks for the rescue, I said, my voice small. He's a bit much, she agreed, her expression wry. Thought you could use some air. She gestured to a worn leather armchair in the corner next to a space heater that was glowing a cheerful orange. "Make yourself at home. There's coffee in the pot over there." I spent the rest of the evening in that chair, sketching the controlled chaos of her workshop. I sketched her hands as she worked, the focused line of her shoulders, the way the light caught in the sawdust that dusted her hair. She put on music, a low-key indie playlist that filled the vast space with gentle sound. For the first time in months, I felt my own creativity begin to stir from its dormant state. The oppressive weight that had been crushing my desire to make art started to lift. Here, in her space, surrounded by the evidence of her passion and skill, I felt a flicker of my old self return. She worked with a quiet intensity that was mesmerizing. She was so completely in her element, so connected to the wood she was shaping. It was a kind of intimacy with her work that I recognized, that I missed. Around 9, she finally stopped, stretching her back with a soft groan. She walked over and looked over my shoulder at my sketchbook. I felt blush creep up my neck, suddenly self-conscious. "You're good," she said, her voice a low rumble near my ear. I could feel the warmth of her breath on my skin. "You capture things." She was looking at a sketch I'd done of her hands, focusing on the detail of a small, pale scar on her thumb. "Thanks," I mumbled, my heart thumping a quick, unsteady rhythm against my ribs. "You should paint this place," she said, her gaze sweeping around the workshop. "The light in here is great." It wasn't a command or a suggestion. It was an invitation, an opening. "Maybe I will," I said, meeting her eyes. Her clear green gaze held mine for a long moment, and the air between us grew thick, charged with a meaning I was too scared to name. The night was a turning point. The workshop became my refuge. I started spending a few evenings, a week there, painting while she worked. We fell into a comfortable rhythm, sharing a space, sometimes talking for hours, sometimes working in companionable silence. I learned about her. She'd grown up in a small town upstate, learned woodworking from her grandfather. She'd moved to the city for a fresh start after a bad breakup of her own, pouring all her energy and savings into her business. There was a quiet strength in her, a resilience I admired deeply. She carried a hidden well of loneliness that she only hinted at, a vulnerability that contradicted her capable exterior. The physical proximity between us began to escalate in small, incremental ways. A lingering touch when she handed me a mug of coffee, her arm brushing against mine as we looked at a wood grain together. Standing shoulder to shoulder in the small kitchen, our bodies close in the confined space. Each touch was like a small electric shock, lighting up my nerve endings, leaving a phantom warmth in its wake. My internal monologue became a constant battle between a burgeoning, terrifying hope and the ingrained fear of being hurt again. "She's just being friendly. Don't read into it. You're roommates. Don't make it weird." But it was already weird. It was charged and vital, and it was starting to feel like the only real thing in my life. One Friday night, a storm rolled in, a wild, thrashing tempest that shook the windows of the apartment. Clara was, thankfully, out for the night at Derek's. It was just me and Brooke. We were on the couch, watching the lightning fork across the dark sky. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died. The apartment was plunged into a thick, profound darkness, the only illumination the strobing flashes from outside. I jumped, a small, startled gasp escaping my lips. "You okay?" Brooke's voice came from just beside me, a calm anchor in the dark. "Yeah, just surprise me." I heard her moving, the soft rustle of fabric. A moment later, a small beam of light from her phone cut through the blackness. "Power's out in the whole neighborhood, looks like," she said, angling the phone to look out the window. She found a couple of emergency candles in a kitchen drawer and lit them, placing them on the coffee table. The room was filled with a soft, flickering glow, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. It felt intimate, isolated from the rest of the world. "Well," she said, settling back onto the couch a little closer than before. "Guess our movie night is canceled." "Guess so." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain lashing against the windows and the distant rumble of thunder. The air was thick with it again, that unspoken thing that lived between us. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally, her voice soft in the quiet room. "Anything." She turned to face me, her expression serious in the candlelight. Her green eyes seemed to search my face. "What was she like? Before?" The question hung in the air. She didn't have to say Clara's name. I knew exactly who she meant. And I knew she wasn't asking for gossip. She was asking about my experience, about my pain. And for some reason in the dark, with the storm raging outside, I wanted to tell her. I needed to tell her. "She was everything," I began, the words feeling rusty and strange on my tongue. "For a long time, she was bright and funny, and she made me feel like the only person in the world. But she shines so bright, she casts a lot of shadows, and I got lost in them. I talked for a long time. I told her about the good years, and I told her about how things slowly fell apart, about the small cruelties that grew into gaping wounds, about the way she'd made me feel small and insecure, chipping away at my confidence until I barely recognized myself." Brooke listened. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes. She just listened, her gaze never leaving my face, her presence a solid, unwavering support in the flickering light. When I finished, my voice was hoarse, and my cheeks were wet with tears. I hadn't even realized I was crying. I felt raw, exposed, but also lighter. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "It's okay," I whispered. "It's over." "No, it's not," she said, and her voice was firm. "It's not okay that she did that to you." She reached out, her fingers hesitating for a fraction of a second before gently brushing a tear from my cheek. Her touch was feather-light, but it sent a tremor through my entire body. Her thumb lingered on my skin, a point of impossible warmth. The space between us seemed to collapse, the air growing thin and heavy. Her eyes searched mine, and in their depths, I saw a storm that mirrored the one outside. "Jade," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "there's something you should know." My breath caught in my throat. "I knew who you were," she said, her thumb still stroking my cheek. "Before you even emailed me about the room, I knew." The world tilted on its axis. The rain, the thunder, the flickering candles, it all faded into a dull background roar. The only thing that existed was her touch on my skin and the impossible truth in her words. "What?" I breathed, my mind struggling to process what she was saying. "How?" "Clara," she said, her voice low and steady, laced with a current of something I now recognized as anger. "She talked about you. A lot. After she moved in, before you did. She told me the whole story, her version of it anyway." A cold, sick feeling washed over me, a familiar wave of shame and humiliation. Clara painting me as the villain, the crazy ex, the basket case. Of course she had. "She told me you were unstable," Brooke continued, her eyes never leaving mine, as if she could hold me steady with her gaze alone. "That you were clingy, difficult. She painted this picture of you," and the more she talked, the less I believed her. I stared at her, speechless. Because in between all the bad stuff, she said, her voice softening, she'd let things slip. How you remembered the name of her childhood dog, how you made her laugh so hard she cried, how you saw colors in the world that she couldn't see. She was trying to convince me you were terrible, but all she did was convince me that you were important, that you were someone who could inspire these huge, world-altering feelings in a person. Her hand moved from my cheek to cup my jaw, her thumb resting just below my bottom lip. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might break free. "So when your email came through," she whispered, her face so close to mine now I could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes, "with your name at the bottom, I had to meet you. I had to see the woman who could cause a storm like that." The confession settled over me, a stunning, terrifying, beautiful weight. She had chosen me, not in spite of my history with Clara, but because of it. She had seen the wreckage and walked toward it, not away. "Brooke," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I wanted to see if I was right," she continued, her voice dropping even lower, becoming a husky, intimate murmur that vibrated through the point of contact on my skin. And I was. You're not difficult, Jade. You're quiet, you're not clingy, you're loyal, and you are so much stronger than you think you are. She leaned in, the last few inches between us disappearing until her forehead was resting against mine. Her eyes fluttered shut. And maybe, she breathed, the words a warm puff of air against my lips. Maybe I wanted to see if I could inspire feelings like that in you too. And then she kissed me. It wasn't a passionate, desperate kiss. It was slow and gentle, a question and an answer all in one. It was the taste of beer and rain and sawdust and something that was just her. It was tentative at first, a soft pressure, and then I was kissing her back, my hand coming up to rest on her chest, feeling the steady, solid beat of her heart beneath my palm. The kiss was a confirmation, a confession sealed. It was the breaking of a tension that had been building for weeks, a silent, powerful current that had finally found its release. In that one simple act, the entire landscape of my life shifted. The ghosts receded. The wounds began to close. When we finally broke apart, we just stayed there, our foreheads pressed together in the flickering candlelight, breathing the same air. The storm outside still raged, but the storm inside me had finally blessedly gone quiet. The first light of morning was a pale, watery gray filtering through the blinds. I woke slowly, disoriented, my body curled on the couch. A heavy wool blanket was tucked around me, and my head was resting on something firm yet soft. A pillow. No, not a pillow. Brooke's lap. Memories of the night before came rushing back in a dizzying, heart-stopping flood. The power outage, the confession, the kiss. Her words echoing in my mind. Maybe I wanted to see if I could inspire feelings like that in you too. I had fallen asleep on the couch, and she had stayed with me. She was asleep now, her head tilted back against the armrest, her breathing deep and even. In the soft morning light, the stern lines of her face were relaxed, making her look younger, more vulnerable. A strand of dark hair had fallen across her forehead. Without thinking, I reached up and gently tucked it behind her ear. Her eyes fluttered open. For a moment, she just looked at me, her green eyes hazy with sleep. Then, recognition dawned, and a slow, beautiful smile spread across her face. It wasn't her usual ghost of a smile. This one was real and wide, and it transformed her entire face. "Morning," she murmured, her voice thick and gravelly with sleep. "Morning," I whispered back, my cheeks flushing with heat. I felt a sudden jolt of morning after anxiety. Was this real? Did she mean it? Or was it just the storm, the darkness, the emotional confession? As if she could read my mind, she reached down and laced her fingers with mine. Her grip was warm and firm, reassuring. "You okay?" she asked, her thumb tracing lazy circles on the back of my hand. I nodded. "More than okay." I paused, then forced myself to ask the question that was screaming in my head. "Last night was that real?" Her smile softened. She squeezed my hand. "Every word," she said, her voice firm, leaving no room for doubt. "It was all real, Jade." Relief washed over me so powerfully it felt like I could finally take a full, deep breath. Just then we heard a key in the front door. Clara. Panic seized me. We were a tangled mess on the couch, my head in her lap, her hand holding mine. It was incriminating. It was everything. Brooke's reaction was instantaneous. She didn't panic. She just gave my hand one last quick squeeze and slowly, gently lifted my head so I could sit up. She moved to the other end of the couch, putting a respectable distance between us just as the front door swung open. Clara walked in, looking rumpled and tired. She glanced at us, her eyes sweeping over the candles on the coffee table and the blanket pooled on the floor. "Power out all night?" she asked, kicking off her shoes. "Yeah," Brooke said, her voice impossibly casual. "Just came back on a little while ago." Clara grunted in response, shuffling toward the kitchen. "I need coffee. Derek's machine is terrible." She didn't seem to notice anything amiss. The tension I felt was entirely my own. I chanced to look at Brooke. She caught my eye and gave me a small, almost imperceptible wink. A secret, shared right there in the open. It sent a thrill right through me. We were a we that had to be hidden for now, but a we nonetheless. Navigating the apartment became a delicate dance of stolen moments and secret glances. A shared coffee in the kitchen before Clara woke up felt like a clandestine rendezvous. Brooke's hand brushing the small of my back as she passed behind me in the narrow hallway was a jolt of illicit electricity. We started leaving the apartment, going on quiet, unofficial dates. Long walks by the river, late-night trips to a 24-hour diner, afternoons spent in the sanctuary of her workshop. It was in those moments, away from the charged atmosphere of our home, that we started to build something real. We talked for hours, filling in the spaces of each other's lives. I told her about my art, my family, my dreams of having a small studio of my own one day. She told me about her grandfather's workshop, about the first chair she ever built, about her fear that her business would fail and she'd have to go back to her small town, defeated. She was gentle and protective, but she also challenged me. She pushed me to start painting again, not just sketching. She bought me a huge new canvas and set it up for me in the best light in her workshop. "Just mess it up," she'd said. "Throw paint at it. See what happens." So I did, and in the chaos of color and emotion, I started to find myself again. One Saturday, about a month after the storm, Clara cornered me in the kitchen. Brooke was out on a lumber run. "You seem happier," Clara said, her tone a strange mix of accusation and curiosity. "I'm okay," I said, keeping my voice neutral as I rinsed my coffee mug. She leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. It was her old interrogation stance. "It's Brooke, isn't it?" My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about? Don't play dumb, Jade. I see the way you two look at each other. You're always disappearing together. Last night I saw her leaving your room." We had been watching a movie on my laptop. It was entirely innocent, but it wouldn't look that way to her. "We're friends," I said, my voice tight. Clara laughed, a bitter, sharp sound. "Right. Friends. Look, just be careful. Brooke's got her own issues. She's not as simple as she looks." The condescension in her voice, the proprietary warning, it ignited a spark of anger in me that I hadn't felt in a very long time. "And you are?" I asked, turning to face her fully. "Simple?" She was taken aback. "That's not what I meant." "What did you mean, Clara?" I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Did you mean that I should be careful not to get hurt again? Or did you mean that you don't like the idea of me being happy with someone else, in your apartment?" The color drained from her face. She stared at me, her mouth slightly open. For the first time, I wasn't the one flinching. I wasn't the one backing down. "Whatever," she finally muttered, pushing off the counter and walking away. "Do what you want." I stood there for a long moment, my heart pounding, not with fear, but with a strange, exhilarating strength. I had stood up for myself, for us. When Brooke got home, I told her what had happened. She listened, her expression unreadable. "What she said," I started, hesitating. "About you having issues?" Brooke sighed, running a hand through her hair. "My ex, the one from before I moved here, it was complicated, messy. Clara knows bits and pieces. She likes to use them." She looked at me, her gaze intense. "I should have told you. I'm not perfect, Jade. I've got baggage." "So do I said, stepping closer to her. I reached out and took her hand, lacing our fingers together. Her hands, which I had once found so intimidating, now felt like home. "Mine comes in boxes. At least yours is just metaphorical." A small smile touched her lips. "I'm tired of hiding," she said quietly. "I'm tired of tiptoeing around her." "Me too," I whispered. That night, we didn't retreat to separate rooms. We cooked dinner together, our movements an easy, familiar dance in the small kitchen. We ate at the island, and when Clara came home, we didn't stop talking, didn't pull away. We just continued our conversation, a small, defiant act of normalcy. Clara took one look at us, grabbed a yogurt from the fridge, and retreated to her room without a word. Later, curled up on the couch, watching a movie, Brooke turned to me. The apartment was quiet. The only sound was the dialogue from the television. "I was thinking," she said, her voice soft. "My lease is up in 6 months. We could find a new place. Together." The offer hung in the air between us, simple and profound. It wasn't a dramatic declaration of love. It was something better. It was a practical, tangible plan for a future, an escape hatch and a foundation all in one. "A place with a studio for you," she continued, her thumb stroking my arm, "with good light." Tears pricked my eyes. This was it. This was the feeling of being chosen, of being seen, of having someone want to build a life with me, not just inhabit one alongside me. "I'd like that," I said, my voice thick with emotion. She leaned in and kissed me, a slow, deep kiss that tasted of promise. It wasn't a secret anymore. It was a fact. A few weeks later, I was in her workshop, putting the finishing touches on the large canvas she'd given me. It was a painting of the workshop itself, but it was more than that. It was a painting about light and shadow, about finding beauty in unexpected places, about the way a space can hold the spirit of a person. It was the best thing I had ever painted. Brooke came to stand behind me, wrapping her arms around my waist and resting her chin on my shoulder. We stood there for a long time, just looking at it. "It's amazing," she whispered into my ear. "You inspired it," I said, leaning my head back against hers. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I have something for you." She let go of me and walked over to her workbench, picking up a small, familiar object. She came back and pressed it into my palm. It was a key, not to the apartment. This one was older, more worn. "It's for here," she said softly, "so you can come whenever you want, whether I'm here or not." I closed my hand around the cool metal, the serrated edges digging into my skin. It was more than a key to a workshop. It was a key to her life, to her world. It was an offering of complete and total trust. I looked from the key to the painting, to her beautiful, serious face, the apartment, Clara, the painful past. It all seemed very far away. My world was no longer defined by what I had lost. It was defined by what I had found right here in this room filled with sawdust and light. I was no longer a ghost in someone else's home. I was finally building my own.